So those type of things, there is a reality which is a commercial reality. You cannot beat that. You know, I mean, we can do as CAs, we can do X work, but you need a lawyer to do something else, and you need a architect to do something else. You can't do it everybody. You have to want all three to be done together. You have to come, all three have to come together to do something else. You know, that's the only way you can execute. So it's a commercial reality that they know. That one person is not in a position to do everything. You know, and therefore they have to have a consortium and take it from there. So
one more point. Apart from repatriation, which Jimit highlighted, any other commercial or any other reason why a distinct entity is not preferred?
What happens is that when you create a separate entity in India, you look at, let's say this entity is Tata's as the design engineering work, suppose. L&T as equipment service thing, and Siemens as some spares it is doing, and an Indian party, some subcontractor, 4 different people. To go to their respective boards and say that Siemens is entering into a joint venture with a contractor in India, the board will never agree to do something on a practical level. Commercially. They will never agree to do something because I can't have a joint venture with a party whom I really don't do it. When I'm bound in an entity level, if I am unincorporated, then I don't own any responsibility qua him. I am only responsible for my work because that is clearly bifurcated and segregated. If I'm a company and a shareholder, then my capital is at risk because if he does something wrong, they can take my capital.
Absolutely. And then closing down that company itself is a headache.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You would rather not.
AOP is unincorporated. The advantage is that you are not taking up any.
But suppose if the partners are ready to.
You can always do. There are many cases that happen, but very rare. I mean, in a large situation of these types, you will not find many things happening like that.
No, in other reasons.
Yeah. Okay, so we've probably dealt with this, but I don't know how. In terms of, you want to have some time to take the internet transfer? Or
No, actually.
Yeah, it will probably because it may take some time.
Yeah.
In terms of all this. I mean, I leave it to you to decide.
I think you can 5-10 minutes you can explain that.
Okay.
Broad.
Okay, those who are
it's going to be
not there.
Sure. Okay, so most people would know that indirect transfer rules were sort of brought in. Yeah, I mean, I'm not getting into the case study like in detail, but let me just try and broadly articulate a few things because what they really meant to say is that if you are transferring shares or interest in a foreign company or entity, which otherwise has nothing to do with India, and let's say you are one non-resident transferring shares of a non-resident company to a third non-resident, you would have not been typically been subject to tax in India. However, if that entity whose shares or interest you're transferring derives its value substantially from India, they wanted to bring it into the tax. So Vodafone was a typical situation. They brought in Section 9, brought in artificial or deeming fictions to bring that into the tax net into India. And the basis on which they laid it that if you derive value from assets which are situated in India, then you have to be taxed if that value derived is more than 50% of the value at which you are transferring the shares of the foreign company. Okay. Now, so the basic concept or the nexus basis of taxation was to say that if you are getting an upside because you own assets in India, then you should be taxed in respect of that upside. And that trigger or the threshold was kept at 50%. If 50% of your value is derived from India assets or 50% more is from overseas assets, then you are not taxable. If 50% or more from India assets, you are taxable. That's the basic construct. Now they have come up with rules. They have come up to say, okay, how do you proportionately tax the capital gain? Because while you may be 65% is derived from India, there is 35% from outside assets outside India. So you should not be taxed in respect of the full 100%, but only in respect of 65% of the proportion of the India assets. So they have come up with rules where they have said this is there. Now, in concept, what they are trying to do is that they are trying to lift the corporate veil and trying to look at where the underlying productive assets are lying, which are the basis of your value generation. So if your business is in India, then the number of entities you hold above is irrelevant because really the value is coming from the business. So Vodafone, telecom operations were in India. The users, subscribers, the entire setup was in India. We were only having shares in an entity outside India, but the 100% of the value was coming from the India productive assets. So that's where they try to bring in that into the tax net, and now they have come up with rules which are saying that how do you decide whether it is substantially derived from India, so more than 50% is from India or not. How do you decide the fair valuation? What are the rules? So they have come up with the rules around it. Now, if you look at a situation where you will have let me put this structure just so that you have the perspective of
just on this thing, because it's more on fundamentals. That of course this Indirect Transfer Act, all these things were introduced from Finance Act 2012, and the rules came in just now, practically. In between, if there is, and that Finance Act 2012, if you see, it's retrospective from 116, and then there's all this 50% limit, everything is prospective. So what happens to the past before the rules? Can we draw an analogy that 50% equally applies to the past? Second thing, if you see, there are certain amalgamation exemptions which are given right now. And say actually these amalgamations had happened before, because this has been from 1/4/2015 financial year. And this has happened before that. Can we draw an analogy that this should have ideally even applied to the, since it has been introduced retrospectively, we should draw an analogy that it should apply retrospectively also, because these are beneficial provisions.
Yeah.
Because then if not, then indirectly or practically there will be huge number of companies will be exposed to indirect transfer.
There will be further issues that although you have 50% value derived from India, you may consider cost as a basis, not the fair market value as a basis, because my investment was X, which has now been deriving large value from the Indian investment. So how do I attribute between the Indian investment versus the non-Indian investment? My non-Indian investment may be much larger, but I derive value more than 50% from the Indian investment. Those will be further issues during this period.
Yeah. So to answer the question on terms of how this will retrospectively apply in the scheme of things, so one is the rules have come only in 2016 now, right now, just 2 months back. So until the rules were there, you will be left open to the interpretation of the act as it stood as at that time. Now, one way of looking at it is that, in last year in the budget they said it will be prescribed. So anything that is between April 1 till the date of the rules today, you may say because it is not prescribed, I did not be taxed at all. But there was a period of time between 2012 and 2015 where there was nothing called prescribed. You have to still, you're just told this is a capital asset in India, the transfer is there in India. Transfer is of this capital asset situation is giving right to income in India. There is nothing called prescribed or anything, because those 6, 7 and the explanations came only 2015.
You interpret what is substantial.
So then you just had explanation 5 to deal with effectively at that point in time, since 2012 to 2015. So at that point in time you have the bare provisions of this section. People even at that point in time in the Delhi High Court upheld 50% test even in the pre-rules situation. So you applied the provisions of the law as it then stood. The rules are clearly not retrospective. They are only post the date they are issued.
But I think we can very well take it. These are all beneficial provisions. So in the intervening period, if they have reopened some assessment.
Can you interpret the provisions having regard to the rules on an independent merit basis? Like 50% was interpreted without the rules, but on a merit basis that okay, the OECD also when it had looked at substantially derived from so and so, they have applied a 50% threshold, and therefore because there were rules there, whether it is 20%, 50% or 80%. 3 possible benchmarks or thresholds could have been applied. And 20% was also there, some arguments were there, 50% arguments, and 80% arguments.
20%.
DTC was 20%. So the court said what is reasonable is 50%. And therefore on merit basis they arrived at 50%, which rules have also now said is good enough. That is fine. So if you can apply or determine the principles of the rule on an independent merit basis without taking recourse to the rules per se.
And then forget the rules came out. There was these exemptions for foreign amalgamation mergers. That came in 2015 with prospective effect.
Correct.
Now that also is the beneficial provision. Now actually merger has happened between say 2012 to 15.
Yeah.
If I would have done after 2015, it was exempt.
Yeah.
And because it is done earlier.
So fortunately for you, you will not have a real situation, because the tax authorities, when they have caught these type of provisions, the 600 odd rulings, issue notices that were issued on these type of transactions, they've all dealt with transfer of shares, not a case of a reorganization or those. Most of those issues that are caught by the tax authority is only doing it. Now there is that committee which says anything which is to be retrospectively done, that committee, and we know no cases have been added on to that list. So now it's history, unlikely that this issue will come up in reality, because but I agree with Paresh bhai that this issue will come out, and let's say you had done a merger in 97. It has not been questioned by the tax authorities today, because it is retrospective. But abhi wo merger mein the cost of the shares that you are currently holding in a foreign company, you didn't have to apply 49(1) or any of those provisions at that point in time because they were not applicable and the rules were not there also, as you rightly said, sections were not there. You know? So now the question will be, and that is what the argument that I would want to explore, is to say that the cost at that point in time will be stepped up to the fair market value of that shares at that point in time. So if I held the investment since 1950, you know, I invested in a Mauritius company and invested in an Indian company.
What is the basis for that?
The basis for that is that what is the cost of acquisition, the normal cost? What commercially you understand as the cost of acquisition? Suppose if 49(1) were not to be there on the statute books today, if you would have done a merger, yeah, the cost of the merger will be that I have given up shares worth X fair market value, and in lieu of that I have got shares worth equivalent fair market value. So that is the commercial cost of acquisition. You know, in any situation of an exchange or any situation there, you will say, what is my commercial cost of it? Because if the rules don't apply under 45 and 48 for the whole of 48, I will determine my cost of acquisition. What is my cost of acquisition? What I commercially understand as the cost. So I can adopt that as a, can I take the step of the cost? Is the question that will come up because the section was not there, you know, on the statute books on the merger amalgamation. Now there are many cases which we looked in the case study that time in the RRC itself. Many cases of mergers today will not even be covered by the exemption sections in 47. You know, when you hold shares in an LLP outside India, or whether shares of a company derives value from a branch in India, the merger exemption is not applicable to you.
And actually, in amalgamation of a two foreign company, even the shareholders of the amalgamated, they are also not covered by exemptions. Actually,
Yeah.
so actually, technically, they are also at risk.
So therefore, David, that risk will not materialize now, knowing the position of the tax authority that they are not going to go back 1962 and start taxing everything after that. But whether the step up can be claimed, those issues will come up when you really apply an indirect transfer rules in the future, because something would have happened with that shares or company at some point in time.
Another aspect is every transfer, indirect transfer, we have to value the Indian value as well as the foreign value.
Yeah.
And
problem
compare
is that
whether you derive a substantial value.
To explain to a client today, it's a big thing. Because I'm facing similar issues right now. They are not ready to understand how come such your laws are this and
You
that.
must understand the law.
No, itself, yeah. What we will explain to them, in a way. So no, but interestingly, the one, where I think let me leave this one last point because I think we don't have the time, but let's leave this last one point with everyone that when they have adopted lifting the corporate way, what they are really saying, and again in line with the discussion of Supreme Court in the Vodafone ruling, that you have to look through the whole structure and look at where the underlying assets are, and then decide the value, whether it is derived from those underlying assets or not derived. That is also the basic objective, because in the memorandum in 2012, when they introduced this provision with retrospective effect, as also the circulars that have been issued later on, they very clearly said the purpose of this amendments in section 9 is to tax gains when they occur from underlying assets situated in India. Okay? So that means that the productive asset really, because now when you lift the corporate well, you are ignoring all the companies and entities structure in between. You are looking straight where is the income getting generated at the source level, and where is that source situated, for me. So that asset is in India or not in India. Now, if you look at the rules in the way they have come, and I would say that the rules have seeking to travel much beyond the intent of trying to tax only the transfer of assets situated in India, is because what happens, let's say you have 3 entities, so you are a US shareholder, yeah? You hold investment in Netherlands, Mauritius, which holds shares in India. Even if you transfer the shares of Netherlands company, forget the PT for the time being, just look at the section 9 for a limited purpose, then what you do is, you say, I will ignore Netherlands, I will ignore Mauritius, I will ignore Mauritius level 2, and I will straight away come and tax as if when I sold Netherlands, I have sold Indian company or Indian assets. That is how I look at it.
Yes.
So I am looking through everything that is outside India. But when you look at the rules, so now you come to the Indian company. Now, is the Indian company the asset that you own, or is it the assets of the Indian company which are the assets that should be the subject matter of the debate? Yeah? And to my mind, if you are looking through everywhere, and even in India, you should look through the Indian company and say, where is the main asset? Where is the source asset? The business, for example. In our case, a business center in India. Business center asset in India, I will tax it. I will not tax because the REIT is in India. I will tax because the business center is in India. The source asset which is giving me the source of income. Now, if that is so, the way the rules work is, they say that if the asset is a shares of an Indian company, yeah, then they don't go and value the assets, they value the Indian company. And in that context, in the rules they specifically mention, and I can actually read out that one para of the rules, which they have
Shares
said,
versus assets.
shares versus assets. Because if you are looking to outside India, then the way the rules work is that when you come to India, you look at. You don't do the look-through principle.
Yeah, then you should see the assets.
You should also look
not
at
the shares of any company.
For example, you can also have a situation where, let's say somebody will bifurcate and say, okay, operating company and holding company. I am giving a different answer for that. Now, you may even have an operating company in Singapore which holds shares in an Indian operating company. Then will you at a Singapore level not look at the operating company and you will not look through the operating company? So there is no answer to that. So there is not a basis which is the right basis there. Because you could also have a holding company in India which holds shares in another company which is holding the asset.
Correct.
And you have to look through the holding company. But in the way the rules apply, if you look at 11 UB number 2, it says where the asset is a share of an Indian company listed on a stock exchange, for example, the fair market value of the shares shall be, not the assets, the fair market value of the shares. Now, again it looks at all these situations, and look at this one, which is a very tricky one. Rule 11 UB8. For determining the fair market value of any asset located in India, being a share of an Indian company or interest in a partnership firm or AOP, all the assets and business operations of the said company or firm or AOP shall be taken into account irrespective of whether the assets or business operations are located in India or outside.
Brands limited.
The brands limited in this structure, because this brands limited was, held in Australia. So I should have not, when I am only saying that I am tax the upside on the underlying assets in India, that is the intent and the object of the section 9, then I should not look at what is outside of India, even if it is an underlying asset.
Here they are going look through.
No, if it's shares of an Indian company, that means you are counting all the assets below it, whether in India or outside India.
Not the rules. No, the section actually just says assets in India.
Assets in India.
Assets situated in India. So it actually uses the word that the standi, locus standi of the assets is in India. When you say situated, means it is located in India. It is identified the locus standi is in India. When you use the word situated. In explanation 6, it is written very clearly.
If you are investing as a holding company in India for the worldwide investments, good difficulty.
If you just have a holding company in India which only owns the asset outside, then there is no asset in India. Suppose if India had a similar rule like Netherlands or Luxembourg or Mauritius, and people set up holding companies in India to invest outside India.
Share of Indian companies is an asset.
It is an asset.
It is an asset.
But what you are doing, you are ignoring shares or Indian company, you are lifting the corporate veil. For all companies, you are lifting the corporate veil.
Outside India, you are saying assets.
Now that is where you are, exactly. That's what I am saying. That they have applied the look through for outside India and look at when it comes to India. Now, you can't have a same philosophy being applied in coming to an inconsistent answer.
When you consider whether the value derived is higher in India, that time you are saying only assets which is in the third country should be calculated on FMV basis. They are not talking about the share value.
So to that extent, it's a question whether the rules will be challenged in the Supreme Court or we'll have to go beyond it, because it's not, to my mind, it is not the right rationale. Now, somebody may argue that if the investments in this, let's say, brands limited Australian assets, was made out of surplus funds of Indian company.
But then also
possible.
That surplus arises because I have invested in India, not because India earned money.
Earn money. So
I would have taken as dividend and invested somewhere else.
So I think in concept, principally, I sort of disagree with the rules. There are of course many issues which we can't deal with in the next 15 minutes for sure. But many cases of reorganization, etc., which are not specifically covered there. But maybe we'll sort of stop there for want of time. And every time this happens, there is a want of time.
No, I think we have covered almost.
Anyway.
Friends, I'm sure you all will agree. It was really excellent. At least for me, definitely, on REITs and also on the other topics of AOP, the indirect transfers. No doubt. Every time it's always be a short of time. I think next time we should give Vishal 4 hours. In fact, when I saw this, I said 2 hours is not enough.
Not possible.
I was in my mind, look at that, okay, 50% will be covered, but 50% covered.